The dust of the trail rose like a copper veil around Amelia Brooks as she stumbled toward the edge of town, one hand clutching her swollen belly while the other dragged a worn leather satchel through the dirt. At 20 years old, with 6 months of pregnancy showing prominently beneath her travel-stained dress, she had become the very thing respectable folk in Cedar Springs, Nevada whispered about behind gloved hands. The twins she carried were her shame in others' eyes, but privately, amid her fear, they represented the only love she had left in the world. The late afternoon sun of May 1876 beat down mercilessly as Amelia paused to catch her breath. 3 days had passed since her father's thundering voice had declared her dead to him, since her mother had turned away with tears streaming down her face, since the door to the only home she'd ever known had slammed shut behind her with finality that still echoed in her ears. "You've brought disgrace to this family," Bernard Brooks had roared, his face mottled with rage. "No daughter of mine carries a bastard child, 2 of them no less. Get out and never darken our doorstep again." Amelia wiped sweat from her brow and looked at the dusty main street of Pahrump, Nevada. She had traveled for days, taking whatever transport she could afford with the meager savings she'd managed to secretly put aside over the years. The small mining and ranching town represented her last hope. Her mother's cousin was said to have settled here years ago, though Amelia had no address, only a name that might no longer even be current. "Miss, you look like you could use some assistance." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady. She turned, startled, to find a tall man atop a chestnut stallion. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see that he was young, perhaps 5 or 6 years her senior, with a strong jawline softened by concerned eyes. A silver star gleamed on his vest. "I'm fine, thank you," Amelia replied automatically, straightening her posture despite her exhaustion. The man dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. "Forgive my directness, madam, but you don't look fine." His gaze briefly dropped to her abdomen, then back to her face without judgment. "Name's Sheriff Victor Walsh, and you would be—" "Amelia Brooks," she replied, seeing no point in deception. "I've just arrived in town. I can see that." His eyes took in her dusty appearance and the single bag. "You have family here," Amelia hesitated. "I'm hoping to find my mother's cousin, Elizabeth Mayfield, though she may have married and changed her name by now." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Elizabeth Mayfield became Elizabeth Carson about 12 years back, runs the boarding house on Pine Street." His expression softened. "She's a good woman, but I have to ask, Miss Brooks, are you in some kind of trouble?" The directness of his question nearly broke her composure. "Not the kind that concerns the law, Sheriff. I've simply fallen on difficult times." "I see." Sheriff Walsh studied her for a moment longer. "Well, if you're looking for Mrs. Carson's boarding house, you're heading in the wrong direction. It's back that way, 2 blocks past the general store." He pointed toward the center of town. "Allow me to escort you. That bag looks heavy." "I couldn't impose. It's no imposition. It's my job to ensure the welfare of everyone in Pahrump, residents and visitors alike." Before she could protest further, he gently took her satchel and offered his arm. Amelia hesitated, pride warring with practicality. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days, and her feet ached from walking. Finally, practicality won. "Thank you, Sheriff Walsh," she murmured, placing her hand lightly on his forearm. As they walked, the sheriff led his horse by the reins with his free hand. "Might I inquire where you've traveled from, Miss Brooks?" "Cedar Springs," she replied. "It's a small town east of here." "That's quite a journey in your condition," he observed, his tone carefully neutral. Amelia tensed. "I managed well enough." They walked in silence for a few moments before he spoke again. Mrs. Carson is known for her kindness, but her boarding house is often full. If she can't accommodate you, there's a room above my office that's occasionally used for those needing temporary shelter." "That's very generous, but I'm sure I'll manage." The sheriff's mouth quirked into a small smile. "Stubborn independence is a valuable trait in these parts, Miss Brooks, but there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered." Amelia might have argued further, but they had reached a two-story building with a neatly painted sign that read, "Carson Boarding House." The white clapboard structure stood in stark contrast to the predominantly wood and adobe buildings surrounding it, with cheerful blue curtains visible through clean windows and flowering plants arranged on the porch. Sheriff Walsh escorted her up the steps and knocked firmly on the door. After a moment, it opened to reveal a plump woman in her 50s, her gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a tidy bun. "Victor, what brings you here?" Her curious eyes shifted to Amelia, widening slightly at her condition. "Mrs. Carson, I'd like to introduce Miss Amelia Brooks. She's just arrived in town and says she's kin to you, daughter of your cousin, if I understand correctly." The older woman's brow furrowed in confusion, then cleared suddenly. "Margaret's girl, little Amelia." Her gaze softened as she took in Amelia's face. "Why, I haven't seen you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Your mama used to send Christmas cards with your picture, but they stopped coming about 3 years ago." Relief flooded through Amelia. "Yes, that's right, Mother. She's been unwell, Mrs." Carson nodded sympathetically, then looked pointedly at Amelia's rounded belly. "I can see you've been through a difficult time, child. Come in, come in." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Mrs. Carson," the sheriff interjected gently, "Miss Brooks has traveled a long way. I wanted to make sure she found safe accommodation." "Bless you, Victor. Always looking out for folks." Elizabeth Carson smiled warmly at him before turning back to Amelia. "You come right in, dear. We've plenty to discuss, and you look dead on your feet." Amelia turned to the sheriff, suddenly awkward. "Thank you for your assistance, Sheriff Walsh." He tipped his hat. "My pleasure, Miss Brooks. The doctor's office is just down the street if you find yourself in need. Dr. Reynolds is a good man." His eyes met hers with quiet understanding. "And my office door is always open." With a nod to Mrs. Carson, he handed Amelia her satchel and returned to his horse. Mrs. Carson watched him go with a thoughtful expression before ushering Amelia inside. "That's a good man, our sheriff. Lost his wife to childbed fever 2 years back. Has a little boy being raised by his sister in Sacramento." She closed the door firmly. "But enough about that. You're swaying on your feet, child. When was the last time you ate?" The question brought tears to Amelia's eyes. "Yesterday morning," she admitted. "I've been conserving my funds." "Sit down right here in the kitchen while I fix you something." Mrs. Carson guided her to a wooden chair at a scrubbed table. "And then you can tell me what brings Margaret's daughter all the way to Pahrump in your condition and all alone." Amelia sank into the chair gratefully as her distant cousin bustled about, setting a kettle on the stove and slicing bread from a loaf on the counter. The homey kitchen, with its cheerful yellow curtains and bunches of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, felt like a haven after days of uncertainty. "Here now, start with this." Mrs. Carson placed a cup of sweet tea and a thick slice of bread slathered with butter and honey before her. "There's stew warming for dinner, but this will tide you over." Amelia murmured her thanks and took a bite of the bread, nearly moaning at the simple pleasure of good food. "Now then, Mrs. Carson said, sitting across from her, "I suspect there's quite a story behind your arrival and those little ones you're carrying." The kindness in the older woman's voice broke something inside Amelia. Tears welled up and spilled over before she could stop them. "Father has disowned me," she whispered. Said I've brought nothing but shame to the family name. Mrs. Carson reached across the table and took Amelia's hand. Start at the beginning, child. I'm listening. So Amelia told her everything, how she had fallen in love with the son of the town banker, how Thomas Davenport had promised marriage once he returned from his studies back east, how their secret meetings had resulted in her pregnancy, how the letter had come 3 months after he left, breaking their engagement because his father had arranged a more advantageous match with a Boston socialite, how she had hidden her condition as long as possible until the town doctor had discovered she carried twins and the news had spread like wildfire. Father was livid, she finished, staring into her empty teacup. He said I was dead to him. Mother couldn't even look at me as he threw me out. Mrs. Carson's face had grown increasingly thunderous throughout Amelia's tale. Bernard Brooks always was a self-righteous hypocrite, she muttered. And this Thomas, what a cowardly snake. I had nowhere else to go, Amelia admitted. Your name came to mind because Mother always spoke fondly of you. You did right to come here. Mrs. Carson squeezed her hand. And you'll stay as long as you need. I've a room at the back of the house that gets nice morning light, perfect for a new mother and her babies. Relief and gratitude overwhelmed Amelia. I can't accept charity. I'll work. Of course you'll work, Mrs. Carson interrupted briskly. I run a respectable establishment with 8 boarders who expect clean rooms and good meals. I could use the help, especially with my arthritis acting up in the damp seasons. But, she added, her tone softening, not until after those little ones arrive and you've had proper time to recover. Thank you, Amelia whispered. I don't know what I would have done if you'd turned me away too. Family doesn't turn its back on family, Mrs. Carson stood and patted her shoulder. Now let's get you settled in your room. You need rest. As Mrs. Carson showed her to a small but comfortable bedroom with a view of the mountains beyond the town, Amelia felt the first stirrings of hope since the day she'd realized she was with child. Perhaps here, in this dusty Nevada town, she could make a new start for herself and her babies. What she couldn't know was how deeply her brief encounter had affected Sheriff Victor Walsh, or how frequently their paths would cross in the coming weeks. 2 days later, Amelia sat in Dr. Reynolds' examination room, her hands nervously clutching the edge of the table as the elderly physician pressed his ear trumpet to her swollen abdomen. Mrs. Carson Elizabeth, as she'd insisted Amelia call her, sat nearby, her presence a comfort in the sterile environment. Yes, Doctor. Reynolds muttered, moving the trumpet to another position. Strong heartbeats, both of them. He straightened with a satisfied nod. You're carrying well, Miss Brooks. I'd estimate you're about 6 months along, which puts your delivery sometime in August. August, Amelia repeated. The height of summer heat in the Nevada desert. The thought was daunting. You'll need to take special care in this heat, the doctor continued, echoing her thoughts. Rest during the hottest parts of the day, drink plenty of water, and no heavy lifting. He glanced at Elizabeth. I trust Mrs. Carson is seeing to proper nutrition. She's feeding me like I'm a harvest crew, Amelia confirmed with a small smile. I've gained back what I lost on the journey here, I think. Good, good. Dr. Reynolds washed his hands in a basin. I'd like to see you every 2 weeks from now on. Twin births can be unpredictable, and I want to keep a close eye on your progress. Doctor, Amelia hesitated, about your fee, we'll sort that out later, he interrupted kindly. For now, let's focus on keeping you and those babies healthy. As they left the doctor's office, Elizabeth linked her arm through Amelia's. He's a good man, Dr. Reynolds. Lost his own wife in childbirth 30 years ago and dedicated himself to ensuring other women didn't suffer the same fate. This town seems full of good men, Amelia observed, thinking of both the doctor and the sheriff who had helped her upon arrival. Some, Elizabeth agreed, and some not so good. You'll learn to tell the difference. She patted Amelia's arm. Speaking of good men, we're stopping by the general store on our way home. Mr. Pearson sets aside the best vegetables for me. The general store was busy with midday shoppers when they entered. Elizabeth immediately engaged Mr. Pearson in conversation while Amelia wandered through the aisles, marveling at the variety of goods available in the frontier town. She was examining a display of fabric when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Miss Brooks, it's good to see you looking more rested." She turned to find Sheriff Walsh standing nearby, his hat in his hands and a genuine smile on his face. Today, in the clear light of the store, she could see that his eyes were a warm hazel color that complemented his light brown hair. "Sheriff Walsh, thank you again for your help the other day. Victor, please, no need for formality when I'm not on official business." His smile widened. "I'm just a customer like yourself at the moment." He held up a small list. "My housekeeper threatened rebellion if I didn't restock the coffee." The notion of the authoritative sheriff being cowed by his housekeeper made Amelia laugh softly. A wise man knows when he's outmatched. Indeed. His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I stopped by the boarding house yesterday, but Mrs. Carson said you were resting." Surprise flickered through Amelia. "You came to call." A hint of color touched his cheekbones. "I wanted to ensure you were settling in properly. Pahrump may not be as refined as Cedar Springs, but we look after our own here." "That's very kind, but I'm not one of your own. I'm just a visitor." "Anyone under Mrs. Carson's roof is considered part of the community." His expression grew more serious. "How are you feeling? Dr. Reynolds taking good care of you. We've just come from his office, in fact. He says all is well." "Good." Victor seemed genuinely relieved. "Mrs. Carson mentioned you're staying through your confinement at least." Amelia nodded, wondering at his interest. "She's been very generous. She's a fine woman. Her late husband was one of my predecessors, you know. Sheriff Carson was legendary in these parts for his fair dealing with both settlers and natives." "I didn't know," Amelia admitted. "She hasn't spoken much about him. It's been 15 years, but I think she still misses him every day." Victor glanced over at Elizabeth, who was now examining apples with critical attention. "They never had children of their own. Perhaps that's why she's taken you under her wing so readily." Before Amelia could respond, Elizabeth joined them, her basket now full of produce. "Victor, I didn't see you come in. Are you bothering my cousin with your lawman suspicions?" He laughed, a rich sound that Amelia found unexpectedly pleasant. "Just making conversation, Mrs. Carson, and maybe wondering if you'd have room at your table for one more this Sunday." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "You know you're always welcome, but I didn't think you'd be back from Carson City by then." Change of plans. The territorial governor's meeting was postponed. He looked at Amelia. "Mrs. Carson serves the best Sunday dinner in 3 counties, Miss Brooks. You're in for a treat." "I've already discovered her culinary talents," Amelia said with a smile. "She's determined to fatten me up before the babies arrive. And succeeding admirably, I'd say." The words were out before Victor seemed to realize how they might sound. His eyes widened in mortification. "That is, I meant you look healthier than when you arrived, not that you're—" Elizabeth laughed openly. "Quit while you're behind, Sheriff." To Amelia's surprise, she wasn't offended by his slip. Instead, she found his embarrassment rather endearing. "I understand what you meant, Sheriff, and thank you. I do feel stronger than when I arrived." His relief was palpable. "Well, I should let you ladies continue your shopping. Mrs. Carson, I'll see you Sunday." He nodded to Amelia. "Miss Brooks, it was a pleasure." As he walked away, Elizabeth gave Amelia a speculative look. He's never flustered, not even when facing down armed claim jumpers last year. He was just being polite, Amelia demurred, though she couldn't help watching his tall figure as he paid for his purchases at the counter. MMHMM. Elizabeth's tone suggested she believed otherwise. Let's pay for these and head back. I need to start the bread if we're to have sandwiches for the boarders' lunch. As they walked home, Amelia found her thoughts returning to the sheriff's kind hazel eyes and the genuine concern in his voice. It had been a long time since any man had looked at her with anything but condemnation or lust. But she quickly checked herself. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for another man, especially now. Her priority had to be her unborn children. They would depend entirely on her for their survival, and she couldn't afford to be distracted by a handsome sheriff with a gentle smile, no matter how kind he seemed. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a merciful breeze that tempered the early June heat. The boarding house buzzed with activity as Elizabeth prepared her famous Sunday dinner. Despite Elizabeth's protests, Amelia insisted on helping, setting the large dining table with the good china and polishing the silver. You should be resting, Elizabeth scolded, though without heat. I've been resting for a week, Amelia replied, carefully arranging napkins beside each plate. Besides, I enjoy feeling useful. In truth, the routine of the boarding house had been a balm to Amelia's wounded spirit. The boarders' 4 minors, 2 store clerks, an elderly widower, and a young schoolteacher had accepted her presence without comment, treating her with the same polite respect they showed Elizabeth. If they speculated about her condition and lack of a wedding ring, they did so out of her hearing. By noon, the aromas of roast beef, fresh bread, and apple pie filled the house. Amelia had just finished arranging a centerpiece of wildflowers when a knock sounded at the door. "Would you get that, dear?" Elizabeth called from the kitchen. "It's probably Victor. He always arrives early to help with the heavy lifting." Amelia smoothed her dress, one of Elizabeth's clever alterations to accommodate her growing belly, and opened the door to find the sheriff standing on the porch, hat in hand. He wore a clean white shirt with a string tie instead of his usual work clothes, and his hair was neatly combed. "Miss Brooks," he greeted her with a warm smile. "You're looking well today." "Thank you, Sheriff. Please come in." "Victor," he reminded her gently, "I'm not on duty today." She nodded, feeling unaccountably shy. "Victor, Elizabeth is in the kitchen. She mentioned you usually help with the preparations. Been doing it for years," he confirmed, following her inside. "Mr. Carson started the tradition of including me in Sunday dinners when I first arrived in Pahrump as his deputy. After he passed, Mrs. Carson kindly continued the practice." In the kitchen, Elizabeth put Victor to work immediately, having him carry the heavy roasting pan from the oven and move the dining room chairs to accommodate all the guests. Amelia noticed how the two interacted with the easy familiarity of long association, exchanging gentle barbs and inside jokes. As they worked, Victor told stories about his week, the dispute between 2 minors over a boundary line, the stray dog he'd adopted after it followed him on patrol, the letter from his sister about his son's first lost tooth. Amelia found herself drawn into the comfortable conversation, laughing at his self-deprecating humor and admiring the obvious care he took in his duties as sheriff. By the time the other boarders gathered for dinner, Amelia felt more relaxed in Victor's presence. The meal itself was lively, with conversation flowing freely around the table. The miners discussed the latest ore findings, the clerks gossiped about town happenings, and the schoolteacher, Miss Winters, shared amusing anecdotes about her students. Victor, seated across from Amelia, occasionally caught her eye with a small smile that seemed meant just for her. Each time it happened, a curious warmth spread through her chest. After dinner, while Elizabeth served coffee and pie in the parlor, Victor found Amelia by the window where she had stepped away to catch her breath. "Too much commotion?" he asked quietly. "A bit," she admitted. "I'm still getting accustomed to being around so many people again." In Cedar Springs, after my condition became known, I was essentially confined to the house. Anger flashed briefly in his eyes. People can be cruel, especially when they're hiding behind so-called moral superiority. "You don't seem bothered by my situation," Amelia observed, studying his face. Victor was quiet for a moment, looking out at the street. "When my wife died giving birth to our son, I learned that life rarely follows the neat paths we expect. What matters isn't whether someone adheres to every social convention, but the character they show in facing life's challenges." He turned to her, his gaze direct. "You traveled across rough country, alone and expecting to make a better life for your children. That shows more character than half the respectable folks in this territory." His words touched something deep inside her. "Thank you for saying that. It's nothing but the truth." He hesitated, then added, "I'm taking a group of children fishing at Miller's Creek next Saturday. The town makes an event of it every summer. There's a picnic afterward." He cleared his throat. "I thought you might enjoy getting out of town for a bit. Mrs. Carson usually comes along to supervise the food." The invitation surprised her. Wouldn't my presence be awkward? Why would it be? His brow furrowed. "You're Mrs. Carson's cousin and you're new to town. It's a perfect opportunity for you to meet more of the community. Not everyone shares your enlightened views, Sheriff." His mouth quirked. "Back to Sheriff, is it? Must have said something to offend." Despite herself, Amelia smiled. "Force of habit, and you haven't offended me. Then you'll come. The creek is cool even in summer, and the shade trees make for a pleasant afternoon." The prospect of escaping the confines of the boarding house, even for an afternoon, was tempting. "If Elizabeth is going." "I am," Elizabeth confirmed, approaching with 2 pieces of pie. "And you're coming too. Doctor's orders include fresh air, and you won't find better air than by Miller's Creek." She handed each of them a plate. "Now eat your pie before the others claim seconds." The matter settled, Amelia found herself looking forward to Saturday with unexpected eagerness. Throughout the week, as she helped Elizabeth with the lighter chores around the boarding house, her thoughts often drifted to Victor, his kind eyes, his easy manner, and most of all, the respect with which he treated her despite her circumstances. It was dangerous thinking. She knew better than to trust in a man's good opinion again. Thomas had shown her just how quickly professions of devotion could turn to abandonment when inconvenient truths emerged. Yet she couldn't deny that Victor Walsh stirred feelings in her that she'd thought permanently extinguished by heartbreak. Saturday dawned clear and hot, though Elizabeth assured her the temperature by the creek would be much more tolerable. They packed substantial picnic baskets, cold chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, and Elizabeth's famous oatmeal cookies, and set out in a wagon driven by Mr. Pearson from the general store. The creek lay about 3 miles outside town, a ribbon of clear water winding through a small valley dotted with cottonwood trees. When they arrived, several families were already there, children splashing in the shallower parts of the water while adults set up the picnic area. Amelia felt a momentary apprehension as heads turned toward their wagon, but Elizabeth squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You're with me," she said firmly. "Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally." Victor appeared as they were unloading the picnic baskets, a group of excited children trailing behind him with fishing poles. "Ladies," he greeted them with a wide smile. "Perfect timing. These young anglers are already dreaming of the fish you'll be frying up later." "They'll have to catch them first," Elizabeth retorted good-naturedly. "We will," piped up a small boy of about 8. "Sheriff Walsh is the best fisherman in the territory. He's teaching us all his secrets." Victor laughed. "Don't oversell my abilities, Tommy. I've been known to come home empty-handed plenty of times." He turned to Amelia. "Miss Brooks, we've set up a comfortable spot under that large cottonwood. There's a chair with cushions that I thought might suit you better than a blanket on the ground." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. "That's very kind, thank you." As Victor helped them carry the baskets to the shaded area, Amelia noticed several women watching them with undisguised curiosity. One, a handsome blonde in an expensive-looking dress, approached with a determined stride. "Victor, I didn't know you'd be here today." Her voice was honey-sweet, but her eyes were sharp as they assessed Amelia. "Mother and I have been hoping you'd call. It's been ages since you joined us for dinner." "Mrs. Hargrove, Miss Hargrove." Victor nodded politely to both women. "I've been rather busy with sheriff's duties lately." "Miss Brooks, may I introduce Mrs. Penelope Hargrove and her daughter, Miss Sophia Hargrove. Ladies, this is Miss Amelia Brooks, Mrs. Carson's cousin who recently arrived from Cedar Springs." Mrs. Hargrove's gaze flicked to Amelia's midsection and back to her face, her smile tightening. "How interesting. Cedar Springs, you say? I don't believe I've heard of it." "It's a small town," Amelia replied evenly. "Not nearly as developed as Pahrump." "Clearly," Miss Hargrove murmured, her tone making the single word an insult. Victor's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Brooks has been a wonderful addition to our community. She's helping Mrs. Carson at the boarding house, and I understand she's quite skilled with accounts as well." "How versatile," Mrs. Hargrove said with a thin smile. "Well, we shouldn't keep you from your fishing expedition. Do remember our invitation, Victor. Sophia has been practicing that piano piece you admired." As they walked away, Elizabeth snorted softly. "Penelope Hargrove has been trying to snare Victor as a son-in-law since Sophia turned 16. 3 years of scheming, and she's no closer to success." Victor looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Hargrove is simply concerned for her daughter's future." "She's concerned with your position and the Walsh family connections back east," Elizabeth corrected. "But enough about the Hargroves. Those children are waiting for their fishing lesson, and we have a picnic to arrange." As Victor returned to the eager children, Amelia helped Elizabeth lay out the food for later. "I didn't realize the sheriff came from an important family," she commented, trying to sound casual. Elizabeth gave her a knowing look. "His father is a federal judge in Boston, and his grandfather was a senator. Victor could have had a cushy life as a lawyer or politician, but he chose to come west instead, made his own way." She smiled. "Drives Penelope Hargrove mad that he shows more interest in helping orphans learn to fish than in Sophia's piano playing." Despite the awkward encounter with the Hargroves, the day proved to be one of the most enjoyable Amelia could remember. The shade of the cottonwoods kept the heat at bay, and the sound of the creek and children's laughter created a peaceful atmosphere. Several of the town's women, following Elizabeth's lead, made a point of introducing themselves to Amelia, treating her with friendly interest rather than the condemnation she had feared. By mid-afternoon, the children had caught several fish, which were cleaned and fried for the picnic. Victor made sure Amelia's plate was filled with the best portions and sat beside her as they ate, regaling her with stories of the town's history and his adventures as sheriff. "You truly love this place," she observed as they watched the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. "I do," he agreed. "When I first came west, I was running from expectations my father's societies. But in Pahrump, I found something worth staying for, A community that judges a person by their actions, not their pedigree or past mistakes. He glanced at her. Most of the time, anyway. The Hargroves didn't seem terribly open-minded, Amelia noted dryly. Victor chuckled. Every town has its Hargroves, but they don't set the tone for Pahrump. His expression grew more serious. How are you finding it, honestly? Amelia considered the question. It's different from what I expected. When Father threw me out, I thought I was facing a life of constant judgment and closed doors, but here, she gestured to the families scattered around them. Here, I'm not just the unwed mother-to-be. I'm Elizabeth's cousin, a boarding house helper, possibly a bookkeeper. I'm allowed to be more than my mistake. Having children isn't a mistake, Amelia, Victor said quietly. The circumstances might not be ideal, but those babies are a blessing. The use of her first name and the conviction in his voice brought tears to her eyes. Not everyone sees it that way. Then they're fools. His hand found hers where it rested on the blanket, giving it a gentle squeeze. And for what it's worth, I think you're going to be an exceptional mother. The warmth of his hand around hers sent a flutter through her chest that had nothing to do with the baby stirring within her. For a dangerous moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to have Victor Walsh in her life permanently, his strength, his kindness, his unwavering support. But reality intruded as the babies shifted again, a reminder of her complicated situation. Reluctantly, she withdrew her hand. We should probably start packing up. The sun will be setting soon. If Victor was disappointed by her retreat, he didn't show it. Instead, he nodded and stood, offering his hand to help her up from the chair. You're right. Elizabeth will want to get you back before dark. As they packed the remnants of the picnic and loaded the wagons, Amelia caught Victor watching her several times, his expression thoughtful. Each time their eyes met, he smiled, not the polite smile he offered to others, but something warmer, more personal. On the ride back to town, with Elizabeth dozing beside her, Amelia allowed herself to consider the possibility that Victor's interest might be genuine. But even if it was, could she trust it? And more importantly, could she risk her heart again when her children's future hung in the balance? These questions followed her into sleep that night, where dreams of hazel eyes and gentle hands mixed with nightmares of abandonment and shame. The weeks following the picnic brought significant changes to Amelia's life in Pahrump. Word of her skill with numbers discovered when she helped Elizabeth balance the boarding house accounts reached Mr. Pearson at the general store, who promptly offered her work reviewing his ledgers 3 mornings a week. The modest salary, combined with room and board at Elizabeth's, meant Amelia could begin saving for her children's future. Victor, too, became a more regular presence in her life. He often stopped by the boarding house in the evenings, ostensibly to discuss town business with Elizabeth, but inevitably finding reasons to engage Amelia in conversation. Sometimes he brought books from his personal library, having learned of her love for reading, or fresh fruit from his small orchard on the edge of town. You don't need to keep bringing gifts, Amelia told him one evening in late June as they sat on the boarding house porch. Elizabeth had tactfully excused herself to check on a boarder, leaving them alone in the gathering dusk. They're not gifts, Victor protested, though his smile was sheepish. Just neighborly sharing. Is that what they call courtship these days? Neighborly sharing? The direct question surprised both of them. Victor's eyes widened and Amelia immediately wished she could retract the words. I'm sorry, she began. That was presumptuous. No, he interrupted, his voice firm. It was honest. And yes, Amelia, if I'm being equally honest, I have been courting you or trying to. He leaned forward in his chair, his expression earnest. I know your situation is complicated. I know you have every reason to be wary of men and their intentions. But I want you to know that my interest in you is sincere." Amelia's heart raced. "Victor, I'm going to have twins in less than 2 months, children fathered by another man. No matter how progressive Pahrump might be, that's a lot to ask anyone to accept." "I'm not anyone," he replied quietly. "And I've given this considerable thought. Have you considered what it would mean for your position in the community, for your career? The Hargroves aren't the only ones who would object to the sheriff taking up with," she faltered, then forced herself to say it, "with a fallen woman." Victor's jaw tightened. "Don't ever call yourself that again, not in my presence." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. "You're a woman who loved unwisely, perhaps, but with your whole heart. That's not a sin in my book. The world doesn't read from your book, Victor. Maybe not. But I've earned enough respect in this territory that my personal choices aren't subject to public approval." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "All I'm asking is that you give us a chance. No commitments, no pressure. Just the opportunity to show you that not all men are like Thomas Davenport." The sound of her former lover's name on Victor's lips jarred her. "How did you?" "Elizabeth told me," he admitted. "Not out of gossip, but concern for you. She wanted me to understand what you've been through." Amelia wasn't sure whether to be annoyed or touched by Elizabeth's interference. "And that didn't dissuade you. It made me admire you more," he said simply. "And it made me want to throttle a man I've never met, but that's beside the point." Despite herself, Amelia smiled. "Violence doesn't become an officer of the law. Even officers of the law have their limits," he replied with a hint of humor, before growing serious again. "Amelia, I'm not asking for promises. All I want is for you to allow yourself to consider possibilities you might have thought closed to you." His words resonated with a longing she'd been suppressing since her arrival in Pahrump. The possibility of love, of partnership, of her children having a father figure, these were dreams she'd forced herself to abandon when Thomas's letter had arrived. "I'm afraid," she whispered, admitting it aloud for the first time. "Not just of being hurt again, but of what it would mean for my children." Victor's hand tightened around hers. "Fear is natural, but don't let it make your decisions for you." His voice dropped lower. "I lost someone I loved once. I know the risk of opening your heart again, but I also know the cost of keeping it closed." Before Amelia could respond, the door opened, and Elizabeth emerged with a tray of lemonade. "Thought you two might be thirsty," she said, though the knowing look she gave them suggested she was well aware of what she'd interrupted. The moment broken, they shifted to lighter topics, but Amelia could feel Victor's gaze on her throughout the evening, patient and hopeful. When he finally took his leave, he lingered at the door, his hat in his hands. "Think about what I said," he murmured, just for her ears. "That's all I ask." After he'd gone, Elizabeth found Amelia still standing by the door, lost in thought. "He's a good man," she said quietly. "The best I know, next to my Henry." "I know," Amelia replied. "That's what scares me." Elizabeth's arm slipped around her shoulders. "Being scared means you've got something worth losing, but sometimes, child, you have to risk losing to gain something greater." As July progressed and Amelia's time grew closer, Victor's attentions became both more pronounced and more practical. He arranged for additional deliveries of ice from Carson City to help combat the fierce summer heat. He hired a local youth to install a ceiling fan in Amelia's bedroom. He even commissioned the carpenter to craft a cradle large enough for twins, "a gift for the babies, not for you," he insisted when she protested. The town, watching this unfold, reacted with mixed feelings. Many, like Dr. Reynolds and Mr. Pearson, approved. Others, particularly the Hargrove circle, were openly scandalized. Whispers followed Amelia when she ventured to the general store or accompanied Elizabeth to church services. "He's throwing away his future on damaged goods," Amelia overheard Mrs. Hargrove telling another woman outside the millinery. "And those children, who knows what kind of blood they carry." The words stung, but not as deeply as they once might have. Amelia had found unexpected strength in Victor's steadfast support and Elizabeth's fierce protectiveness. She had also discovered allies among the townspeople like Miss Winters, the school teacher, who pointedly invited Amelia to help with the town's Independence Day celebrations, placing her in charge of the children's reading competition. "Don't you worry about Penelope Hargrove," Miss Winters had told her afterward. "Her influence extends precisely as far as her money and no further. The decent folk in this town make up their own minds." By the end of July, with her confinement imminent, Amelia had come to a decision about Victor's patient courtship. The evening was cooler than usual, with a pleasant breeze stirring the curtains in the parlor where they sat playing chess, a game Victor was teaching her with more enthusiasm than skill. "Checkmate," Amelia announced, moving her queen into position. Victor stared at the board in comical disbelief. "That's the third time tonight. Are you certain you've never played before?" "Never," she confirmed with a laugh. "Perhaps you're just a very good teacher. Or perhaps you're a natural strategist." He began resetting the pieces. "Another game." Amelia shook her head, suddenly nervous about what she'd planned to say. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." Victor's hand stilled on the chess pieces, his expression growing serious. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous," she assured him quickly. "Just important." He pushed the board aside, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening." Amelia took a deep breath. "You've been extraordinarily kind to me these past 2 months, more than kind. You've been a friend when I desperately needed one, and you've shown me that there are good men in this world, men who keep their word and act with honor." "Amelia," she held up a hand. "Please, let me finish before I lose my nerve." When he nodded, she continued, "You spoke of courtship, of possibilities. I've been afraid to consider those possibilities, afraid to trust again. But I've realized something." She met his gaze directly. "I've realized that my fear isn't protecting me anymore, it's just preventing me from living fully." Hope dawned in Victor's eyes, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I can't promise what the future holds," Amelia said softly. "These babies will always come first in my life. But if you still want to court me properly, knowing all the complications that entails, then I'm willing to see where this path leads us." For a moment, Victor didn't move, and Amelia feared she'd misread his intentions. Then, slowly, he reached across the table and took both her hands in his. "Amelia Brooks," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "nothing would make me happier." The raw sincerity in his words brought tears to her eyes. "Even with all the gossip, the judgment, let them talk," he said firmly. "What matters is what we build together, not what others say about it." He raised one hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The tenderness of the gesture, so different from Thomas's passionate but ultimately hollow declarations, made Amelia's heart swell. The moment was broken by a sharp pain that lanced through her abdomen, causing her to gasp and pull her hands away. Victor's expression immediately shifted to concern. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Just a strong kick," Amelia assured him, placing a hand on her swollen belly. "They've been increasingly active lately. Dr. Reynolds says it's normal as they—" She broke off as another pain, stronger than the first, took her breath away. Victor was on his feet instantly. "That's not a kick. How long have you been having these pains?" "On and off since this morning," Amelia admitted. suddenly realizing what she'd been dismissing as general discomfort might be something more significant. But they weren't regular, and Dr. Reynolds said first babies are often late, especially twins. Not always, Victor said grimly. He strode to the parlor door. Mrs. Carson, I think we need Dr. Reynolds. Elizabeth appeared so quickly she must have been nearby. One look at Amelia's face told her everything. I'll send Jim for the doctor, she said, referring to one of the boarders, and start heating water. As Elizabeth hurried off, Victor returned to Amelia's side, his face a mask of concern. Can you stand? We should get you to your room. Another pain answered that question. Amelia clutched the arms of her chair, breathing through the contraction as Dr. Reynolds had taught her. I don't think so. Not right now. Without hesitation, Victor slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Hold on to me, he instructed, already moving toward the stairs. Amelia wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face against his shoulder as another contraction began. It's too early, she whispered fearfully. Almost 3 weeks early. Early babies are often the strongest, Victor said with a confidence she suspected he didn't feel. And yours have a fighter for a mother. He carried her to her room, where Elizabeth was already turning down the bed and laying out clean linens. Together, they got Amelia settled as comfortably as possible, with Victor retreating to the hallway while Elizabeth helped her change into a nightgown. The next hours passed in a blur of pain and fear for Amelia. Dr. Reynolds arrived promptly, his face serious as he examined her. Definitely in labor, he confirmed, and making good progress. First babies sometimes take their time, but twins have their own schedule. But it's too early, Amelia repeated anxiously. The doctor patted her hand. 3 weeks isn't so very early, my dear, and these little ones sound strong. He pressed his ear trumpet to her belly, listening intently. Yes, good strong heartbeats, both of them. Now, we just need to be patient and let nature take its course. Nature, it seemed, had decided to take a rapid course. By midnight, Amelia's contractions were coming fast and hard, leaving her gasping for breath between them. Elizabeth remained by her side, wiping her brow with cool cloths and murmuring encouragement, while Dr. Reynolds prepared for the delivery. Victor had been banished to the downstairs parlor, where he was reportedly wearing a path in the carpet with his pacing. When Elizabeth briefly left to fetch more hot water, she returned with a message. Victor says to tell you he's praying for you and the babies, she told Amelia, and that he'll be right here waiting, no matter how long it takes. The knowledge that he remained, steadfast in his support even now, gave Amelia strength as the hardest part of labor began. Dr. Reynolds positioned himself at the foot of the bed, his manner calm but focused. It's time to push now, Miss Brooks. Your first little one is ready to meet the world. What followed was the most challenging and miraculous experience of Amelia's life. With Elizabeth supporting her back and holding one hand, she summoned every ounce of her strength and determination. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, but so was the fierce drive to bring her children safely into the world. At 15 minutes past 2 in the morning, the first cry pierced the room, thin but determined. A boy, Doctor Reynolds announced, quickly cleaning and wrapping the tiny infant before handing him to Elizabeth. And a fine-looking lad he is. Amelia caught only a glimpse of dark hair before another contraction seized her. The second delivery proceeded more quickly, and at 2:27 a.m., a second cry joined the first. Another boy, the doctor said, his voice warm with satisfaction. Identical, unless I miss my guess. Elizabeth placed the first baby in the crook of Amelia's arm while Dr. Reynolds tended to his brother. Exhausted beyond measure, Amelia gazed down at her son's tiny face, overwhelmed by a love so powerful it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mother." The baby's eyes, dark blue like all newborns, seemed to focus on her face for a moment before closing in sleep. His brother joined him moments later, nestled in Amelia's other arm, a perfect mirror image. "They're beautiful," Elizabeth said softly, tears streaming unashamedly down her weathered cheeks. "Absolutely perfect." Dr. Reynolds, having finished his necessary medical tasks, stepped back with a satisfied nod. "Two healthy boys, Miss Brooks. Small, as twins often are, but with good color and strong lungs. You did magnificently." "May I tell Victor?" Elizabeth asked. "The poor man must be beside himself with worry." At Amelia's nod, Elizabeth slipped from the room. Dr. Reynolds busied himself with final preparations, giving Amelia a few minutes alone with her sons. She studied their tiny features, marveling at their perfection: the delicate ears, button noses, and miniature fingers that curled reflexively around her own when she touched them. "Your lives haven't started the way I planned," she told them softly, "but I promise you'll never doubt how much you're loved." A gentle knock at the door preceded Elizabeth's return, Victor hovering anxiously behind her. At Amelia's tired smile, he entered the room, his steps hesitant as he approached the bed. "Two boys," Elizabeth announced unnecessarily, the pride in her voice evident. "As handsome as their mother is beautiful." Victor stood transfixed, staring at the tiny bundles in Amelia's arms. "They're amazing," he breathed. "How are you feeling?" "Exhausted, sore, happier than I've ever been," Amelia replied honestly. "Would you like to hold one?" His eyes widened in alarm. "I don't know if I should, they're so small." "You won't break him," Dr. Reynolds assured him with a chuckle. "Here, sit in that chair by the bed, and Mrs. Carson will show you how to support the head." With nervous care, Victor settled into the chair, and Elizabeth gently transferred one of the babies into his arms. The contrast between the tiny infant and Victor's strong hands was striking, but he cradled the boy with instinctive tenderness. "Hello there, little man," he murmured, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world." Watching him with her son, Amelia felt something shift inside her heart, the final walls of fear and doubt crumbling away. This was a man who could love children not of his blood as his own, who had waded through a night of uncertainty not because of obligation, but because he cared. "Have you thought of names?" Victor asked, looking up from the baby to meet her eyes. Amelia nodded. "I was thinking of William and Henry after Elizabeth's husband and my grandfather. William Henry and Henry William Brooks. Strong names," Victor approved, "for strong boys." "Which one are you holding?" Victor glanced at Elizabeth, who smiled. "The firstborn William Henry, if that's what you decide." As if recognizing his name, the baby stirred and opened his eyes, gazing solemnly up at Victor. "I think he approves," Victor said with a soft laugh. Dr. Reynolds cleared his throat. "As delightful as this is, Miss Brooks needs rest now. Sheriff, perhaps you could return in the morning." Victor nodded, reluctantly returning William to Amelia's arms. "Of course." He stood awkwardly for a moment, then leaned down to press a gentle kiss to Amelia's forehead. "You are remarkable, Amelia Brooks. Get some rest. I'll be back tomorrow." As he left the room, Amelia felt her eyelids growing heavy with exhaustion. Elizabeth took the babies, placing them carefully in the cradle Victor had commissioned large enough for twins, just as he'd planned. "Sleep now, dear," Elizabeth said softly. "I'll watch over them." Amelia's last thought before drifting into sleep was that for the first time since learning of her pregnancy, she faced the future not with fear but with hope. The following weeks were a blur of exhaustion and joy for Amelia. The twins, though small, proved to be healthy and vigorous, demanding frequent feeding and attention. Elizabeth was an invaluable help, drawing on years of experience helping other new mothers in town. Victor became a daily visitor, often arriving in the early evening after his duties were complete. He would sit with Amelia while she nursed the babies, talking about his day or reading aloud from one of his books. As the boys grew more alert, he took to holding them one at a time, telling them stories about the town and its history. "They're too young to understand," Amelia protested once, though she loved watching the interaction. "Perhaps," Victor agreed, not taking his eyes off Henry, who was gripping his finger with surprising strength. "But it's never too early to start learning about where you come from." The tenderness Victor showed toward her sons only deepened Amelia's growing feelings for him. Their courtship had taken an unusual turn, conducted largely in her bedroom during the early weeks after the birth, with two newborns as constant chaperones, but it progressed steadily nonetheless. By mid-September, when the twins were 6 weeks old, Amelia had recovered enough to resume some of her normal activities. She began working at the general store again, bringing the babies with her in a specially built double cradle that Mr. Pearson installed behind the counter. "Good for business," he declared when she thanked him. "Every lady in town finds a reason to shop here now just to peek at those boys." It was true. The twins had become minor celebrities in Pahrump, their arrival somewhat overshadowing the scandal of their parentage. Even Mrs. Hargrove had unbent enough to stop by the store one day, ostensibly to purchase ribbon but clearly intent on seeing the babies about whom everyone was talking. "They are quite handsome," she admitted reluctantly, peering into the cradle. "You're fortunate they don't favor their father." The barbed comment might once have wounded Amelia deeply. Now, secure in the life she was building, she merely smiled. "Yes, they seem to have my coloring, though I'm told all babies change as they grow." Mrs. Hargrove's lips thinned at Amelia's refusal to be provoked. "Indeed." "Well, Sheriff Walsh certainly seems taken with them. Quite unusual for a man with no children of his own to be so involved." "Victor has a son," Amelia corrected her gently, "living with his sister in Sacramento, and he's been very kind to us, as have many people in Pahrump." The pointed reminder that Victor was a father of fact Mrs. Hargrove had conveniently overlooked in her matchmaking efforts seemed to fluster the older woman. She made a hasty purchase and left, but not before Amelia caught a calculating look in her eyes that suggested the matter wasn't closed. That evening, as they sat on the porch enjoying the cooler September air while the twins slept inside, Amelia told Victor about the encounter. "She'll never give up, you know," she said, watching his reaction carefully. "Not until Sophia is safely married to someone of suitable position." Victor's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Mrs. Hargrove may be disappointed then. Last I heard, Miss Hargrove has been corresponding quite regularly with a young banker from Denver who visited his uncle here last spring." "Really?" Amelia couldn't hide her surprise or her relief. "I hadn't heard that. Few have. Mrs. Hargrove prefers to maintain the fiction that her daughter remains available to the right suitor here in Pahrump." He reached over to take Amelia's hand. "A fiction that benefits me, as it keeps her too occupied to focus overmuch on my personal affairs." The casual way he entwined his fingers with hers sent a pleasant warmth through Amelia. These small touches had become more frequent in recent weeks, along with occasional chaste kisses that left her both satisfied and yearning for more. "Is that what I am? A personal affair?" she teased, though there was a hint of genuine question beneath the lightness. Victor's expression grew serious. "You know you're far more than that, Amelia." A cry from inside interrupted what might have been said next. Amelia sighed. "That sounds like William. He always wakes first." "I'll get him," Victor offered, rising smoothly. "You rest a bit longer. As he disappeared into the house, Amelia marveled at how naturally he had slipped into a role that most men would have avoided, especially with children not their own. In the 6 weeks since the twins' birth, Victor had changed diapers, walked fussy babies in the middle of the night, and even learned to distinguish between their different cries. When he returned with William, the baby was already quieting, soothed by the gentle motion and soft murmurings. Victor settled back beside Amelia, adjusting the blanket around the infant with practiced ease. "He just wanted some company," he reported. "No need for feeding yet, I think." "You're becoming quite the expert," Amelia observed, leaning closer to stroke William's cheek. "Better than me sometimes." "Hardly," Victor scoffed, "but I had some practice with Daniel before." He trailed off, the mention of his son bringing a shadow to his eyes as it always did. "You miss him terribly, don't you?" Amelia asked softly. Victor nodded, his gaze fixed on William's face. "Every day. My sister sends regular reports and daguerreotypes, but it's not the same as watching him grow." "Why is he in Sacramento?" Amelia had wondered this for months but never felt it right to ask directly. "Why not here with you?" A deep sigh escaped him. "After Sarah died, I was not myself. Grief-stricken, angry at God, barely functioning. My sister Catherine came to help, and when she saw how things were, she offered to take Daniel back to Sacramento until I recovered." His voice dropped lower. "I agreed, thinking it would be for a few months at most. But then the months stretched into a year, and by the time I was myself again, Daniel was settled there, calling Catherine Mama and her husband Papa." "Oh, Victor," Amelia's heart ached for him. "I visit 3 times a year," he continued, "and Catherine brings him here each summer for a month. He knows I'm his father, but—" He shrugged, the gesture failing to hide his pain. "At 6 years old, his life is there now. Uprooting him seemed selfish when he's happy and well cared for." "It wasn't selfish," Amelia said firmly. "It was one of the most selfless things I've ever heard." Victor looked up, surprised by her vehemence. "You put your son's happiness and stability above your own desires," she explained. "That's what good parents do." His free hand found hers again, squeezing tightly. "Thank you for understanding." They sat in companionable silence for a while, William dozing against Victor's chest, until the question that had been forming in Amelia's mind over recent weeks could no longer be contained. "Victor, what are we doing?" she asked quietly. He glanced at her, brow furrowed. "Sitting on the porch. Holding a baby. I'm not sure I understand us," Amelia clarified. "This courtship. Where is it leading?" She took a deep breath. "Because I need to be clear about what's possible and what isn't, for the twins' sake as well as my own." Victor was quiet for a long moment, his fingers still linked with hers. When he spoke, his voice was steady and sure. "I had planned to wait a bit longer to give you more time to be certain, but since you've asked—" He shifted to face her more directly, cradling William securely with one arm. "Amelia Brooks, I've come to love you more than I thought possible after losing Sarah. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination, and I've come to love these boys as if they were my own." His eyes, warm and sincere, held hers. "If you'll have me, I want to marry you. I want us to be a family, you, me, William, Henry, and Daniel when he visits. I want to give these boys my name and raise them as my sons." Though she had suspected this was coming, the actual words still took Amelia's breath away. "The town would talk," she said, though it was a weak objection even to her own ears. "Let them," Victor replied simply. "We'll be too busy being happy to notice. And Daniel, what would he think of suddenly having 2 baby brothers and a new mother? He's asked me several times when I'm going to find him a new mama," Victor said with a small smile, "and brothers to play with. Children are often more accepting than adults give them credit for." William stirred against Victor's chest, whimpering softly. As if on cue, Henry's cry joined his brother's from inside the house. "Feeding time," Amelia noted. "We should go in." Victor stood, still holding William carefully. "You haven't answered my question, Amelia." She rose as well, looking up at the man who had changed her life and her future in ways she could never have imagined 6 months ago. "Yes, Victor Walsh. I'll marry you. I'd be honored to be your wife and Daniel's stepmother." His smile was radiant as he leaned down to kiss her, a kiss interrupted by William's increasingly insistent cries. They both laughed as they broke apart. "Parenthood," Victor said with mock resignation. "Romantic moments always interrupted. You're certain you want to sign up for more of this?" Amelia asked as they headed inside. "More certain than I've been of anything in a very long time," he replied, and the conviction in his voice banished her last lingering doubts. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Pahrump. As expected, reactions were mixed. Elizabeth was delighted, declaring that she'd known from the moment Victor helped Amelia off that stage coach that they were meant for each other. Dr. Reynolds offered hearty congratulations, as did Mr. Pearson and several of the boarding house residents. Others were less enthusiastic. Mrs. Hargrove made a point of avoiding both Amelia and Victor, while her social circle exchanged disapproving glances whenever the couple appeared together in public. A few of the town's more conservative citizens expressed concern about the sheriff marrying a woman of questionable reputation. But Victor had been right about the respect he'd earned in the territory. The county commissioner, when informed of the engagement, merely slapped Victor on the back and said, "About time you found some happiness again, Walsh. And those boys need a good father." They were married on a crisp October morning in the small church on Pine Street, with Elizabeth standing as Amelia's witness and Dr. Reynolds as Victor's. The twins, now 2 months old, were held by Miss Winters and Mr. Pearson in the front pew, remarkably quiet throughout the brief ceremony. Amelia wore a simple dress of pale blue silk that Elizabeth had helped her make, with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Victor looked handsome and slightly nervous in his best suit, his sheriff's badge polished to a high shine on his lapel. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Thompson declared. "You may kiss your bride." As Victor's lips met hers, sealing their union, Amelia felt a profound sense of rightness, as though every difficult step of her journey had been leading her to this moment, to this man, to this family they were creating together. The wedding breakfast was held at the boarding house, which Elizabeth had decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons. Most of the town attended, curiosity overcoming disapproval even for those who had voiced concerns about the match. The Hargroves were conspicuously absent, but their non-attendance only lightened the mood of the celebration. By mid-afternoon, the last well-wishers had departed, and Amelia found herself in the parlor with her new husband, both twins sleeping peacefully in their cradle nearby. "Mrs. Walsh," Victor said, testing the sound of her new name. "It suits you." "Does it?" Amelia smiled, still adjusting to the change herself. "I suppose it does." He drew her into his arms, a liberty he'd refrained from taking during their courtship except in the most chaste fashion. "Elizabeth has offered to watch the boys tonight," he murmured against her hair. "She thought we might appreciate some privacy on our wedding night." A blush heated Amelia's cheeks. Despite having given birth, she was technically still an innocent in the ways of marriage, her experience with Thomas having been limited to passionate embraces that had gotten out of hand just once. "That's very thoughtful of her," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. Victor lifted her chin gently, searching her face. "We can wait if you prefer. There's no rush." The tenderness in his offer only confirmed what Amelia already knew: this man would never pressure her, never demand what she wasn't ready to give. It was one of the many reasons she had fallen in love with him. "No," she said softly. "I don't want to wait. We've waited long enough, don't you think?" His smile was answer enough as he bent to kiss her, a kiss deeper and more promising than any they had shared before. When they parted, both were breathless. "I should feed the twins before we go," Amelia said, practical even in her desire. "They'll sleep better for Elizabeth if they're full." Victor nodded, releasing her reluctantly. "I'll bring the buggy around. Our house is ready whenever you are." Their house, the sheriff's residence at the edge of town, which Amelia had visited only once before, to help Victor prepare it for their arrival. He had spent weeks renovating the nursery, adding a second crib and painting the walls a cheerful yellow. The master bedroom, too, had been refreshed with new curtains and a larger bed that had made Amelia blush when she first saw it. Now, as Victor helped her into the buggy an hour later, the twins securely wrapped and nestled in Elizabeth's capable arms, Amelia felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with nervousness. This was the beginning of their life together, not as a courting couple chaperoned by babies and boarding house rules, but as husband and wife. The short ride to the house passed in comfortable silence, Victor's hand occasionally reaching over to squeeze hers reassuringly. When they arrived, he insisted on carrying her over the threshold, a tradition he claimed was non-negotiable. "Welcome home, Mrs. Walsh," he said, setting her down gently in the entry hall. Home. The word resonated deeply for Amelia, who had thought herself homeless when her father closed his door against her. Now she stood in a house that would be hers, a place to raise her sons, to build a future, to love and be loved. "It's perfect," she said, turning in a slow circle to take in the simple but comfortable furnishings, the photographs on the mantel, the bookshelves filled with volumes that spoke of Victor's wide-ranging interests. "Not quite perfect yet," Victor corrected with a smile. "But it will be, with you and the boys here." That night, as they discovered each other with gentle exploration and growing passion, Amelia felt the last pieces of her broken heart mend completely. Victor's touch was reverent, his patience infinite as he guided her through the mysteries of physical love with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "I love you," she whispered as they lay entwined afterward, her head pillowed on his chest. "I never thought I could be this happy again." His arms tightened around her. "Nor did I. You've given me back something I thought was lost forever, Amelia." "What's that?" she asked, lifting her head to see his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Hope," he said simply. "Hope for the future. Hope that joy can follow sorrow, that broken things can be made whole again." She laid her head back down, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "We'll build that future together," she promised. "Day by day." "Day by day," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Starting tomorrow, when we bring our sons home. Our sons." The words warmed Amelia as much as Victor's embrace. William and Henry would grow up with a father who had chosen them, who had seen them not as burdens or reminders of another man's betrayal, but as gifts to be cherished. As she drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, Amelia thought of the journey that had brought her here, the shame and rejection, the lonely days of fear, the chance encounter with a kind sheriff on a dusty street. From deepest despair to profound joy in the span of 6 months. She had been unwed and heavy with twins, disowned by her father when Victor Walsh had said, "Come." And in coming to Pahrump, in trusting this man with her broken heart, she had found not just shelter but a home, not just acceptance but love. It was more than she had dared to hope for, and as sleep claimed her, Amelia's last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude for the unexpected grace that had transformed her life. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Walsh family. The twins grew into sturdy, mischievous toddlers, the image of their mother with dark hair and bright eyes that missed nothing. Their legal adoption as Walsh children was finalized on their first birthday, a day celebrated with a town picnic that even the Hargroves attended. Mrs. Hargrove, having somewhat reconciled herself to the situation after her daughter's engagement to the Denver banker became official. Daniel's first visit after the wedding was tentative, the 6-year-old understandably wary of his new stepmother and baby brothers. But Amelia's gentle patience and Victor's clear love for all 3 boys gradually eased his concerns. By the end of the month-long stay, Daniel was proudly helping with the twins, announcing to anyone who would listen that he was a big brother now. When the time came for him to return to Sacramento, he clung to Amelia as well as Victor, extracting promises that they would write often, and that the twins would learn about their big brother in his absence. "We could petition for custody," Victor suggested that night after watching Daniel's departure with a heavy heart. "Catherine might understand now that we're settled." Amelia considered the idea carefully. "We could," she agreed, "but is that what's best for Daniel? He's established there with school and friends, and Catherine is the only mother he's really known." Victor sighed, acknowledging the truth of her words. "Perhaps when he's older, he can decide for himself where he wants to be. Until then, we make his visits here as meaningful as possible," Amelia said firmly. "And we travel to Sacramento when we can." That compromise guided their approach to the complex family situation. Daniel visited 3 times a year, his stays growing longer as he aged. By his 10th birthday, he was spending entire summers in Pahrump, forming a close bond with his half-brothers, who adored their big brother Dan with unquestioning devotion. The boarding house continued to thrive under Elizabeth's management, though she gradually reduced her workload as the years passed. When arthritis began to seriously limit her mobility in 1880, she finally accepted Amelia and Victor's long-standing offer to move into their home. "Just until I'm feeling stronger," she insisted, though everyone knew the arrangement would be permanent. "Of course," Amelia agreed, already preparing the downstairs bedroom that would allow Elizabeth to avoid the stairs. "The boys will be delighted to have you closer. William has been asking when you'll teach him to make those sugar cookies he loves." Elizabeth became a beloved fixture in the Walsh household, her wisdom and quiet humor enriching their family life. She proved especially helpful when Amelia discovered, in the spring of 1881, that she was expecting again. "You don't seem surprised," Amelia said when she shared the news with her cousin. Elizabeth smiled knowingly. "I've been watching you turn green at the breakfast table for 2 weeks, child. Some things don't change, no matter how many babies you have." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with 5-year-old William and Henry taking a keen interest in their mother's expanding waistline. Victor was alternately overjoyed and terrified, memories of Sarah's difficult delivery occasionally darkening his eyes, despite Dr. Reynolds' assurances that Amelia was in excellent health. "This isn't like before," Amelia reminded him gently one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "I'm not carrying twins, and I've had excellent care from the beginning." "I know," he admitted, "but I can't help worrying. I couldn't bear to lose you, Amelia." "You won't," she promised, covering his hand with her own. "We still have too much life to live together." Their daughter, Catherine Elizabeth Walsh, was born on a snowy December morning in 1881, arriving with such speed that Victor himself delivered her before Dr. Reynolds could arrive through the storm. She was a robust 8 pounds with a shock of dark hair and her father's hazel eyes. "She's perfect," Victor whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he placed the swaddled infant in Amelia's arms. "Absolutely perfect." When Dr. Reynolds finally arrived. He found the new parents still marveling over their daughter, with the twins peering curiously at their sister from the foot of the bed, and Elizabeth keeping a watchful eye on all of them. "Well, I see my services weren't needed after all," he said good-naturedly. "Sheriff Walsh may have missed his calling as a physician. Once was enough," Victor replied with feeling, "but I'm grateful I was here to help." The doctor examined both mother and baby, pronouncing them in excellent health. "A fine Christmas gift, this little lady," he observed. "Have you decided on a name, Catherine Elizabeth?" Amelia replied, exchanging a smile with her husband. "After Victor's sister and my cousin, the two women who helped us find our way to each other." Elizabeth, who had been maintaining a practical demeanor throughout the birth, finally succumbed to tears at this announcement. "I'm honored beyond words, my dears." Little Catherine, Kate, as she quickly became known, thrived, growing into a spirited girl with her father's quiet confidence and her mother's determination. The twins adored their baby sister, appointing themselves her protectors and playmates from her earliest days. Daniel, now 10 years old when Kate was born, was initially wary of the infant during his Easter visit, watching from a distance as the family fussed over her. But Amelia made a point of including him in Kate's care, showing him how to hold her securely and explaining how important a big brother's influence would be as she grew. "You were the first to teach William and Henry to skip stones in the creek," she reminded him, "and to recognize animal tracks. Think of all you'll be able to teach Kate when she's older." The boy straightened with pride at these reminders. "I could teach her to fish when she's big enough," he offered. "Girls can fish too, right?" "This girl certainly will," Victor assured him, ruffling his son's hair affectionately. As the children grew, so did the town of Pahrump. The 1880s brought increased mining activity, a proper schoolhouse, and even a small hospital funded largely by a donation from the Walsh family, who had invested wisely in several business ventures over the years. Victor continued as sheriff until 1887, when he decided not to run for another term. 11 years is enough," he told Amelia as they discussed the decision. "The territory is changing, becoming more organized. It's time for younger men with fresh ideas." Instead, he turned his attention to ranching, purchasing land outside town where he raised cattle and horses. The venture proved successful, allowing the family to live comfortably while maintaining a schedule that permitted Victor to be more present for his growing children. For Amelia, the years had brought a confidence and sense of purpose she could scarcely have imagined that day in Cedar Springs when her father had turned her out. In addition to raising 4 children, 5, counting Daniel during his increasingly frequent and extended visits, she had become a respected figure in Pahrump, serving on the school board and helping establish a lending library that evolved into a proper town library by 1890. She also maintained a special interest in helping young women in difficult circumstances, working with Elizabeth and Dr. Reynolds to ensure that no girl in their community ever faced the kind of rejection and shame she had experienced. Their efforts eventually led to the establishment of a small home for unwed mothers on the edge of town, a place where young women could find support, medical care, and vocational training. "You've created something remarkable here," Victor told her after the home's official opening in 1892. "Something that will change lives for generations." "We created it," Amelia corrected him, leaning into his embrace as they stood on the porch of the newly completed building. "I couldn't have done any of this without your support." It was true. Throughout their 16 years of marriage, Victor's steadfast belief in her had never wavered. He had encouraged her pursuits outside the home, celebrated her successes, and comforted her through inevitable setbacks. Together, They had built not just a family, but a legacy of compassion and community service that transformed their corner of Nevada. The most significant change in their family structure came in 1893, when Daniel, now 23 and studying law at the University of California, announced his intention to move permanently to Pahrump after graduation. "Sacramento is a fine city," he explained during his Christmas visit home. "And Aunt Catherine has been wonderful to me, but this has always felt like home in a way nowhere else does. I want to establish my practice here where it's needed." The news delighted Victor and Amelia, though they were careful not to pressure Daniel, knowing the decision must be entirely his own. "We'll help however we can," Victor assured him, "but only if you're certain this is what you want." Daniel's smile, so like his father's, was answer enough. "I've never been more certain of anything. Besides," he added with a grin at his siblings, "someone has to keep an eye on these three troublemakers." William and Henry, now 17 and in their final year of school, protested this characterization, while 11-year-old Kate merely stuck out her tongue at her eldest brother. "See what I mean?" Daniel laughed. "Completely uncivilized without my influence." That evening, after the younger children had gone to bed, Amelia found Victor in his study, staring thoughtfully at a photograph of their family taken the previous summer, all 5 of them grouped around Elizabeth, whose health had begun to decline noticeably in recent months. "A penny for your thoughts," she said, perching on the arm of his chair. He looked up with a smile, wrapping an arm around her waist. "I was just thinking about how fortunate we've been. How different things might have been if you hadn't come to Pahrump that day, or if I hadn't happened to be on that street when you arrived." "Divine providence," Amelia suggested, "or remarkable luck, perhaps both." He pulled her gently onto his lap, a familiar gesture that still gave her a flutter of pleasure after all their years together. "Did I ever tell you what I thought the first time I saw you? That I looked like a bedraggled stray cat in desperate need of assistance?" she teased. "No," he said seriously. "I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever encountered, standing there in a strange town, visibly expecting, with nothing but a single bag and your own determination to see you through." His hand came up to caress her cheek. "I admired you before I even knew your name." Amelia leaned into his touch. "And I thought you were too good to be true, a lawman who didn't immediately judge me as fallen or immoral." "I've never regretted it," Victor said softly. "Not one day of our life together, even the difficult ones. There had been difficult days, of course. The year William broke his leg falling from a horse and developed a dangerous fever afterward. The terrible drought of 1888 that nearly destroyed their ranch. Elizabeth's stroke in 1891, which had left her partially paralyzed and unable to speak clearly. But the good days far outnumbered the bad. Watching the twins graduate at the top of their class, seeing Kate's face light up when she mastered a difficult piano piece, standing beside Daniel at his university graduation, countless family meals, holidays, and quiet moments together that formed the tapestry of a life richly lived. "Nor have I," Amelia assured him, resting her head against his shoulder. "You gave me and my sons a future when I couldn't see beyond the next day. You taught me to trust again, to hope again." "We gave each other that gift," Victor corrected gently. "You healed places in my heart I thought would remain broken forever." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the occasional creak of the house settling and the distant howl of a coyote in the hills beyond their property. "Daniel seems determined about moving back," Amelia said eventually. "Have you spoken with him about joining your practice?" After leaving the sheriff's office, Victor had studied law through correspondence courses, eventually passing the territorial bar examination and establishing a small legal practice that complemented his ranching interests. The prospect of his eldest son joining him had been a long-held dream. We discussed it briefly. He has some interesting ideas about expanding the practice to serve the outlying communities. Victor's voice held unmistakable pride. He's going to be a fine lawyer, Amelia, better than I ever was. Because he had you as an example, she said, kissing his cheek. Just as William and Henry have had, and Kate too. Another comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 11. We should get some rest, Amelia said, making no move to rise from his lap. The boys want to ride out to the north pasture early tomorrow to check on that new foal. Victor agreed, equally disinclined to end their quiet moment together. His arms tightened around her waist. Have I told you today how much I love you, Mrs. Walsh? Amelia pretended to consider the question. I believe you mentioned something along those lines at breakfast, and again before dinner, but I wouldn't object to hearing it once more. I love you, he said, his voice dropping to the intimate tone that still sent shivers down her spine after 16 years of marriage. More today than yesterday, and not as much as I will tomorrow. A convenient arrangement, she murmured against his lips. Since I happen to love you in exactly the same increasing measure. Their kiss deepened, holding all the familiarity of long partnership and the enduring spark of genuine passion. When they finally parted, both were a little breathless. Perhaps we should continue this discussion upstairs, Victor suggested, his hazel eyes warm with meaning. Amelia stood, offering her hand to help him up. I think that's an excellent proposal, Mr. Walsh. Hand in hand, they climbed the stairs to the bedroom they had shared since their wedding night. The house around them held their sleeping children, the photographs and mementos of their years together, the evidence of a life built with love and perseverance. It was a life neither of them could have imagined on that fateful day in 1876, when a disowned young woman, heavy with twins, had found her way to Pahrump, Nevada, and a compassionate sheriff had simply said, "Come."